It's Dr. Brian Mowll, the diabetes coach, and welcome back to another episode of Mastering Blood Sugar. I have with me here today someone named CJ Walker, who goes by the Genetic Diabetic and has a great website at geneticdiabetic.com. And CJ is someone who is going to give us some great information about LADA, latent autoimmune diabetes of adulthood, which is a condition that doesn't get talked about enough. Some people call it type 1.5 diabetes. It's oftentimes misdiagnosed as type 2 initially, but there are some key things to know about LADA. And so I think we have the best person to educate all of us about this condition, and that's CJ Walker. So CJ, welcome. It's great to be with you today.
Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. So you were just about to kind of tell me your story about how you were diagnosed and a little bit about this condition. So, why don't we go back to that and then how you ended up starting your blog and posting information about this condition?
Absolutely. So I was originally diagnosed with type 2 diabetes back in 2019. It was very unexpected. It was caught doing a follow-up of another condition, which at that time I was having chronic hives and also I was anemic. So that went well, but unfortunately, as we were prepared to end the appointment, my doctor took a look at my blood sugar levels and realized that my blood sugar levels was at a 300. So, I was like pretty shocked because I'm not feeling anything. I've been feeling pretty good, probably better than I did like 6 months before. So we ended up having to take another blood test. And I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes back in 2019. And it was a shock because although I had experienced gestational diabetes with 2 out of my 3 kids, I was eating a lower carb diet in general. I was doing everything that I could to actually prevent type 2 diabetes. So when that came about, it was just really like a shock. So that's when I actually started writing on an occasional basis on my blog on the Genetic Diabetic. And originally it was just for me to vent because, it's like, yeah, diabetes suck. I don't know why I'm going through this. And, when you're on your diabetes journey, it could be quite lonely. It could be lonely. So that was why I started doing the blog. Well, it's been several months and, I found something that would work for me. My A1C was actually pretty low, but I was still feeling pretty bad at the same time. I had connected with a few diabetes groups, online diabetes groups for extreme low carb diets. So no more than 30 grams of carb a day, no grains, no breads, pretty much just like meat, low carb vegetables, things like that. So, I was taking on that and I was pretty dedicated with it. I was very strict on myself, but, as a result, I'm seeing very low A1Cs, but I was still tired. Eventually depression set in. I was losing hair. And, as a mom of 3 kids, 3 active ones at that, you need all the energy that you can get. And I wasn't getting that. So when I started seeking out more diabetes groups, I started listening to some of the stories of others, and they were talking about LADA, which is latent autoimmune diabetes in adults, how they were originally diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, but after all that they can do, all the treatments, their A1Cs were still high, and when they decided to reach out to the doctors and get follow-up tests, they find out that they're actually a type 1.5. So some of the symptoms that some of them were experiencing was, of course, their treatments were not working, but also people who had normal blood pressures, cholesterols were good, and that was some of the things that I was experiencing. Otherwise, with blood sugar numbers, that was it was just, I was normal. But also like with weight, even though type 1 diabetes, you could be any size, in order to be diagnosed with diabetes. But in my case, when I was diagnosed, I was about 99 pounds. So I'm a small frame woman. And, and dealing with that, and it felt like, okay, I'm listening to these people's stories, and this, I feel in the criteria for all of them, but I didn't know how to exactly go to approach a doctor and ask them, like, okay, well, how can I be tested for LADA again? So once I did my own research, and I also decided to get a new endocrinologist, I was able to get the confidence to approach him and tell him, well, I think I could be experiencing this. Can I get tested for LADA? And he was able to give that to me. And back in January of last year, I went ahead and took the blood test. He tested my autoantibodies. And to find out, my autoantibodies was like over 25,000.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. And
was that the GAD 65?
Yes, the GAD. And I think the cutoff was like 2,000. So to be like 25,000, that's just insane. Right. So obviously I am considered now as a LADA type 1. It was caught in time that I'm not taking insulin right now. So it's more just like checking in with my blood sugars. And if it's over a certain amount, then eventually I will need to have insulin therapy. But as of right now, I'm just managing with exercising, my diet, and just going from there.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, so it's interesting. You really did not fit the phenotype or the typical, look of or, presentation of someone with type 2 diabetes. You weren't overweight. You didn't have really a lot of signs or any signs of insulin resistance other than a high blood sugar. But the diagnosis was made for type 2 diabetes pretty much based on your age and your blood sugar, it seems like. So
yes, I was about 38. I'm 42 now.
Yeah, so, and the fact that maybe that you've had gestational in the past. So,
yeah, which I could, it's like I could understand that too. But it just seemed like the way that it was presented, I was never pre-diabetic, which would be another, another thing to take a look at is that I was never pre-diabetic at all. It just seemed like it just like happened all of a sudden, like without warning.
Yeah, so this just goes to show, you're a perfect example of how this can get missed because, you do not fit into what we typically think of as type 2 diabetes. The only criteria you have would be high blood sugar, other than, your age, which would rule out type 1 for the most part. So that's, that's a little bit of a red flag there. And then, so did anybody else, any other doctors other than the people in the groups that you talked about, did any other doctors ever mention LADA to you or, suggest that even could be a possibility?
No, not to my knowledge. And like I said, I didn't even know what LADA was until I started getting myself affiliated with different groups.
Yeah. That's again, I really think the reason I'm making a big point of this is I really think for the health practitioners watching this, you got to put this on your radar because a lot of people get missed and it ends up, they are different conditions and I believe they should be treated a bit differently. And I can talk a little bit about that, but if you don't have the proper diagnosis, it's really hard to treat properly. We're not. So if somebody comes in with type 2 diabetes, we're focusing a lot on insulin resistance. So, there's fasting strategies, there's energy restricted eating plans that can work. There's, even certain nutrients or supplements that might improve insulin sensitivity that aren't going to have, much of an impact in someone with LADA because that's not the problem. So, and in your case, this is an autoimmune condition. So, we do, I think there's a value in actually looking at, is there something triggering the immune system? Is there something driving this autoimmunity that, it's not going to be cured, but it could be calmed down and managed. And if you don't know about that, if you're not even thinking autoimmune, you're going to miss that completely. So, so I think there's a lot of value in understanding the condition. And again, your case demonstrates perfectly how it can just be totally missed by primary care doctors, endocrinologists, a lot of people who, should know better. So, and I'm glad you're in that group and found out about that and took matters into your own hands. So that's great. So what's changed, if anything, in your management of the condition since you got the diagnosis? Have you been doing anything different, or is it just an awareness for you?
So for me, when I was diagnosed with type 2, I was prescribed metformin, which honestly I still take today. And as far as like with my low carb diet, it is more liberal now, because of the diet that I partook in. It led me to disordered eating issues. So once I was diagnosed with LADA back in January, a couple of months later, I addressed the situation of disordered eating, which is orthorexia, because I was so focused on getting that perfect number, making sure that I had the exact carbs. I had to have like no less than 30. And if it's like 25, I'm good. If I'm getting close, I'm freaking out. So for me, it caused an issue. And not only did it cause an issue with myself, but for those around me. So I started taking the initiative to seek a therapist. I worked with a diabetes educator who helped me get back and focus on track. And then also with another nutritionist to help me out as well. And as a result now, life is pretty different. I have a lot more energy. I'm able to do all the things and more that I was able to do within like 3 years ago. But I feel that with this diagnosis and knowing what's really happening to me, I feel like it's for the better. And I feel like if I did not seek out, it could have been worse. And it could have put me to the point where I would have been more malnutrition and, losing all those nutrients every day.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think we can take any diet too far sometimes. And when it becomes obsessive and, an area where we start to maybe focus too much on it and forget about other things that are important in life, or again, drive ourselves into a state of anxiety around it, then that can be dangerous. So it's a really good point. And so I'm glad you brought that up as well. We have to find balance, and that's a little different from person to person. So I'm glad you were able to do that also. So right now you've continued the blog, you share information. What's your kind of central, purpose and mission around the blog? Are you trying to bring awareness to LADA? Are you trying to help people with diabetes just feel supported? What is your mission with that?
So the purpose of my blog is making sure that others are seen, heard, and respected. That's pretty much my basis for my advocacy and for my blog and the information that I give to others. So it's just real life, how it is just navigating diabetes. And especially, for parents with young kids like myself, you don't see a lot of stories with that. So I feel that, what I bring to the table is a bit different, and just, letting people see, that, yeah, you can still be a parent and still parent and still do those things and take care of yourself. So that's pretty much what I do with that. But other things that I do, I run a pod for diabetes sisters in my local area. And then I'm a part of a couple of health organizations serving as an advocate. So it allows me to just help not only people with diabetes, but with other chronic illnesses as well. So, it's definitely more than just diabetes, but, that's pretty much the center of it all.
Okay, great. Wow, that's an amazing mission. What are a few things that someone who either doesn't have diabetes or maybe is newly diagnosed with diabetes might not know about sort of the day-to-day of the condition? Like, what are some things that maybe you weren't aware of that you learned along the way that maybe would surprise some people?
I would say, but it takes a lot of planning. There's like a meme that I see often on social media where it says, you have to make like 180 extra decisions a day. And you know what? I think not only, for those who use insulin therapy, but just with diabetes in general, it just, it's like you have to make a lot more decisions, man. You normally would have to, and then add, being a parent of it. It's a whole lot of decision making. So yeah, it takes organization. It takes advocating. You have to advocate for yourself. And I feel that, because I was able to do that research and advocate for myself, I'm able to manage it on the way that works for me. So it takes organization. It takes a lot of advocating and standing up for yourself.
Yeah, that's huge. I love that. One thing that I think a lot of people don't realize too is all the different factors that can affect blood sugar. So, diet is one of them, of course.
Yes.
But it's not even just how many carbs we eat. I mean, how we put together our meals and combine our foods, and when we eat and how often we eat and how much we eat, our sleep, right? Stress, if you're sick, all these things can have a big impact. And sometimes it just seems to have a mind of its own, right? So
it does, because for me, like just being nervous can like shoot my blood sugar up to like 30 points, or, like I said, stress, and then hormones. For us ladies, it's hormones, and it's like there's nothing you can do about it. And I'm very grateful to have a diabetes educator who understands that. And surprised, like, why aren't we not talking about this? Because even, when it comes to male and female, there's a difference, with these hormones. And, you can't help it. You just live with it, and, it's just how it is. But
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is a huge difference. And, if you're menstruating female, what time of the month is it in regards to your cycle?
Well, weeks before that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So men have hormone fluctuations throughout the month also. So you're right. There's a lot of different factors that impact it. And we don't talk about those enough, I don't think, in conventional diabetes care. So that's an important point as well. Now, I'm curious, have you, as someone with LADA, have you had insulin levels tested? Have any of your doctors, or have you requested, or have any of your doctors tested your insulin? Okay.
I did. And at the time of my diagnosis, I believe it was actually in normal range.
Okay.
So I haven't had one taken since then, but yeah, definitely ideal to make sure you have it, because that changes, and then that makes a difference of whether you need to add insulin therapy to your management. So,
right. Okay, cool. Yeah, I still don't think that's done probably without a prompt, but I'm glad that you got that done, because it, to me, is something that I think in the years coming, we will see that added probably as a pretty standard test for people, at least in the pre-diabetic range. But to me, it's an essential test, especially someone with LADA, because you want to find out what is your ability to control your own blood sugar without injecting insulin or exogenous insulin. So good. Yeah. So what about with LADA specifically? Is there anything that you feel like you can share with people maybe who are newly diagnosed with LADA, or just finding out that this might be a possibility for them? Some things that you've learned to help you with blood sugar control, or just even mentally and emotionally dealing with the condition?
I can remember a point around this time last year where it's like, okay, I have this, I realize what my condition is now, but because I'm not using insulin as of yet, it's like you kind of like in between. I think that's where the 1.5 comes in, because it's like, okay, well, you're not taking insulin as of a typical diagnosed person with type 1 diabetes, and then at the same time, it's not necessarily type 2 either. So you feel like it's just kind of like in the middle. That's how it was for me at one point. But I feel that as if someone who has been recently diagnosed with LADA, I think you would feel a sigh of relief that you know what's going on now. And that's what it was for me. There were people I was like, oh, and I'm sorry that this happened. But it's like for me, I was relieved because, I knew that something wasn't right. And then someone was able to listen to me and my concerns and was able to give that result. So I think for one, there is a feeling of like relief and knowing what's happening. But as far as like with, daily, no matter which part, whether if you are taking insulin or you're not, your number one priority should be to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. And so you could be there for others. For me, I have to be there for my family. I'm a mother and I'm a wife. So I need to make sure that I'm taking care of myself so I'm able to be the best that I could be for them. So, yeah, I think that would be some of the things that I've learned on my journey so far. And, and honestly, it's still new for me. So I'm learning something every day. But right now, these are my takeaways for.
That's great. I love it. So I'll share a few things about LADA that I've learned over the years also. And I think first, for people who maybe aren't all that familiar with what we're talking about, we've given you the name, which is latent autoimmune diabetes in adults or adulthood. And just like the name implies, it's an autoimmune condition. So there's other autoimmune conditions that you can think of, like Hashimoto's thyroiditis, there's celiac disease, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, and so on. And what happens in an autoimmune disorder is your immune system somehow gets triggered to attack healthy tissue or enzyme pathways or hormones or things like that. So there's actually at least 5 different diabetes autoantibodies. And the main one is GAD65. There's anti-pancreatic islet cell antibody, IA2. There's zinc transporter antibody. There's insulin antibodies. So you can have any of those be positive, and sometimes there's 2 or 3. But what the problem is really the same, is that the immune system somehow is viewing these self parts, these hormones, these enzymes, these chemicals, these cells, as an invader that kind of needs to be destroyed. Now, one of the things that makes LADA different than type 1 is it's not as typically not as strong of an attack. It shows up later in life, it's usually more slowly progressing. So, like you said, CJ, you were able to either catch it early enough or stop it before it progressed to a point where the pancreas, the beta cells in the pancreas are still alive and functioning enough to produce enough insulin so you can control your own blood sugar. So then the question is, how do we, try to preserve that as long as possible, right? And, one of the ways to do that is by not taxing the pancreas too much, not activating the pancreas too much. It's going to be active to some degree, of course, but just like in thyroid, autoimmune thyroid, we don't want to overactivate the thyroid because it's going to sort of expose it to more attack. Pancreas is the same way. So while you don't need to do a ultra low carb or keto diet or anything like that, you still want to avoid lots of processed sugar and refined flours and stuff that's going to cause insulin surges. It's going to really activate the pancreas because that's going to sort of raise it up on the radar of the body, and you'll get typically higher antibody levels. But you want to preserve the pancreas as much as you can. I also believe, and this is more of a functional medicine concept, but I think there's things you can do to sort of modulate and calm the immune system. There are food triggers, and we know there's research, for example, with type 1 diabetes that cow's milk protein, casein protein, particularly A1 casein, can sometimes trigger type 1 diabetes. That's been shown in literature. I haven't seen it specifically to LADA, but I would think it'd be similar. So and it's different for everybody. Sometimes it's chronic infections that can trigger the immune system. But, we want to sort of pay attention to how our body responds to certain foods. And, if you do see some sort of inflammatory response from eating a particular food, then we probably want to minimize that. So there can be some food management. Things like vitamin D can be really helpful for immune modulation. Some people say probiotics because the gut is where a lot of immune inflammation is driven from. So gut health can be important as well. So you want to try to do everything you can to kind of keep the immune system balanced and healthy and not overzealous, because that can speed the progress of the condition. And then on the other side, you mentioned metformin. So metformin works. It does improve insulin sensitivity to some degree, but its main mechanism is suppression of glucose output in the liver. And so that can be good even for people, even for people like you with LADA, because there can be an overproduction of glucose in the liver, raising blood sugar. So that can be helpful. And there's other medications that can be or maybe typically type 2 diabetic medications that can help bring blood sugar down in a case of LADA, like SGLT2 inhibitors or other medications. What you typically wouldn't need is like the semaglutide, which is real popular now for weight loss, and these drugs that are specific for insulin resistance. We don't really use them much anymore, but the medications, the TZD medications, for example. So I think there is some specific management for LADA that can be helpful. We always want to be working on insulin sensitivity, because the more insulin sensitive you are, the less insulin you need to make, to control blood sugar. So that's important. And then, we talked about sleep and stress and, staying healthy and, regulating emotions and all those things. And that's important for anybody with any type of diabetes because, of course, we're not going to be perfect. We're all dealing with stuff, but the more you can try to, just stay balanced and healthy and happy and so forth, I think the less blood sugar swings you're going to have.
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay, good. Indeed. I love it. So as we're getting close to wrapping up here, what's a message that you want to kind of leave everybody with? And people listening to this are going to range from health practitioners and physicians to people, who maybe have a friend or family member with diabetes, or they might have just been newly diagnosed, or a lot of them might have type 1, type 2, or even LADA. So what's a message that you kind of want to leave people with who are dealing with this spectrum of problems?
For one thing I definitely want to mention is that, for doctors and healthcare professionals, just to take a closer look at each individual patient, especially, when we're diagnosed with diabetes, that for one, we are properly diagnosed. I've written a post about a couple of years ago discussing how, if you are diagnosed with diabetes, make sure you know which type that it is. And if for any reason that you feel that maybe it's something else, to at least double check and check those insulin levels and A1Cs and getting those autoantibody tests to make sure that we are correctly diagnosed. Because what happens is that when we, continue to manage these conditions, knowing that it's not even the right condition, that is putting us at risk for adverse health effects, even up to the point of death, depending on, where you are on this journey. So I believe it should start right at diagnosis, that we need to make sure that we're aware of what type of diabetes and that is confirmed. Another thing that we talk about, especially in our diabetes communities, is, when we're diagnosed with diabetes, and particularly type 2, and even I've heard some from type 1, where we're not given a lot of information or a lot of guidance. It's like, hey, you have diabetes. Here's your prescription for your medication, your insulin, and that's pretty much it. Otherwise, it's like we're almost spending for ourselves. And that kind of happened in my case. So that was what led me to seek out Diabetes Sisters at that time, because I needed to have the type of support that, one, that I was not alone, and then two, just getting additional resources and hearing from other people in the community, sharing their lives and their journeys. So, at diagnosis, while we're, we're diagnosed, getting double checked and making sure that we have our diabetes diagnosis is confirmed, just to make sure that we have the resources to the groups that are around them, folks and, different organizations that we can reach out to. That would make a world of a difference, because there's a lot of us that are out there that just feels like we're not receiving the care that we need, and we need to change that. So that would be the message that I would
that's
share.
an important message. Important message. You're so right. I really think that we need more advocacy, more communication, more a group. We need to come together more. This is it's a cultural issue as much as anything. And I think in conventional medicine, diabetes is oftentimes oversimplified as just being a high blood sugar thing, and you just take a medication to lower the blood sugar and everything's going to be fine, or whatever. We're going to manage it that way. And I think the personalized approach that you're recommending is really key. And so we have to find a way to do that. I think, I'm a diabetes educator, and I think diabetes education is a really good place to start. I think we can be sort of the coach or the quarterback or the advocate for clients and patients, but we definitely need more of that. And for now, certainly, it's not really being done inside healthcare. So I love what you're doing with, groups outside of the sort of conventional healthcare system to provide that for people. So if anybody's interested, check out CJ's blog website at geneticdiabetic.com. Where else can people find you?
So I do have my blog, but for people to best reach me is on IG at the Genetic Diabetic blog. Like a tongue twister.
Okay. So Instagram, Genetic Diabetic blog.
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. Thanks for being with me today, CJ. Thanks everybody for listening. And we'll see you back next time.